Excellent. And live we are. What's up, fine people?
Indeed. I was able to put down that very last slice of steak.
You killed that
I did.
after you set off all the fire alarms in your house.
All of them. Not just one. Yeah, there was several smoke alarms that went off. Oh, look, it starts right at me just savoring the last little bit of steak. The inside listeners are able to see my process for cooking that delicious piece of meat right there, which is suspiciously bears a good amount of resemblance to Gordon Ramsay's method.
Yeah, it's exactly
It's,
like it.
yeah, and I just call myself a C word the whole time because there's no one else around. So I just swear at myself while I'm cooking it.
Which is funny because
Makes it
apparently
tender.
the C word is
Mm-hmm.
is really just kind of very ordinary in it's kind of like saying like dickhead or asshole or something in the
Right.
UK. But here it's like the
Right.
worst thing that you could say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is key king pilled content. Like if you want this sort of gripping conversation, you got to be part of the supporting listeners group. This is what we
That's
talk
right.
about.
Otherwise, welcome to another episode of Neo-reactionary reading Rainbow fans. That's right. Today we'll be taking on another piece of writing from the blogger formerly known as Mencius Moldbug.
That's so good. Neo-reactionary reading Rainbow is just
That's
the
right.
best description.
And if you would like to sign the petition to get Matthew Erickson to host Jeopardy, well, you can do that in the Inside Listeners group as well.
That's right. If you join, you get all the petitions. Get this tweeted here live now. Okay. One thing that, speaking of cooking and food and that sort of thing, because I'm the master of the segue, just before I came up here today, I was down with the little man. Today is his second day eating solid foods. And what we're doing is this is all Amy. She's the one that has done all the legwork on this and figured out all the best way to do everything and all that. Because she's a superhero like that. She put together a little plate for him of normal food. So yesterday was his first day. It was avocado, some pieces of like slices of avocado and pear. And then today it was some mashed up sweet potato and some banana and some yellow bell pepper. And we just give it to him, just put it on a little plate and put it on his tray in front of him and let him go ham. It's called baby-led weaning. And so I guess what happens when you feed a baby with a spoon and you like put a bunch of baby food on it and just keep feeding it to them, number one, they don't, you're overriding their instinct to take in food. So, like, if you want to train that well from the beginning, you let them feed themselves, and as they feed themselves, they can feed themselves just as much or just as little as they want, and go at the speed that they want, and all that. So it is like the messiest thing you could imagine. There was avocado everywhere yesterday, and there was sweet potato everywhere today, and there's lots of gagging and like throwing up. Like he's like will kind of start to swallow, and then he'll be like. And he just kind of just ralphs and like pieces of banana come out, and it's just part of the way that you do. You just go and
sounds
let him
great.
figure it out. Yeah, it
No,
was
it
pretty
sounds
fun.
brilliant. No, it would be really funny. I just have this vision of him just growing up, looking a fair bit like you, just being like a 35-year-old man, but he still eats like Mr. Peepers from Saturday Night Live in the 2000s or whatever. Where he's just like,
Yeah.
that'd be pretty good.
Oh,
But just like holding like really like enlightened conversations, and then just like, well, you see, because the postmodern, just trying to have that. And this girl's like,
He's like Cookie Monster.
Right.
That'd be funny. Okay, so
He'll figure it out. We all do.
Popular Liberty wants to know when we're making the listeners group. That is a very good question.
I mean,
We should put that on the docket for our next quarterly King Pilled meeting.
Yeah. Right.
Soon. I know we keep saying soon with some of this stuff, but we're trying to get a number of projects finished, and then and both of us are pretty busy outside of all this, so everything just kind of goes slowly. But
Yes.
very soon, we're gonna get some. We had a really good conversation yesterday on nailing down some stuff about the logo and the branding for the show and the mission for the show. what we're wanting to accomplish, the message that we're wanting to send, what it means to be king pilled, all that kind of stuff. We had just a fascinating conversation yesterday, and we actually touched on yesterday in our intra organization meeting. We had we touched on the conversation that I was on Twitter. Popular Liberty was a big part of it for a long time, and but it started out with me talking to Vin Armani and this other guy on Twitter. I was following him. I don't know what his I don't know exactly who he is, but he was someone in Vin's circle named Micro President on Twitter, and he seemed like a pretty smart dude with economics and AI and Bitcoin and stuff. So we got into a conversation about libertarianism and about Christianity, and we saw things differently. We had a difference of opinion, and it turned into a pretty long conversation. But suffice to say, that guy, Micro President, and I are no longer following each other. It was one of those types of conversations. But it was very enlightening for me. And one thing for me, like, I'll have kind of an instinct about a subject or about something, but the best way for me to really refine my thoughts on it is to argue it, is to debate it. And it's kind of hard for me to understand an idea unless I'm able to talk it out with someone else and kind of go back and forth. And so I love that. I love it's very easy for me to have a pretty heated argumentative debate with someone and not have like hard feelings about it. The problem is always that everyone else has hard feelings about it. So I guess that's kind of the libertarian contrarian in me. But the for me it was very, very enlightening, and I had I came away even more convinced of my position than I was going in. And so it was very useful for me from that perspective. But it was basically about free will and the relationship of God's law to God's love. So you can go on Twitter at @RealKingPill. You can go look back through my replies, and it was a pretty long conversation over a couple of days. So you can go read that now if you want to. I want to talk about it in the future, but the goal here today, we're going to do this Moldbug piece, and I want to get into that free will conversation here at some point. I'm actually offline, so Popular Liberty and I went and took the conversation to the text messages. He reached out to me, and I have yet to reply to him. I'm still going to reply to him. I'm just so many things on the to-do list because I want to keep fleshing this out, because he understood more where I was coming from, and our differences are almost just semantic, but I think it's going to be good. We're both kind of coming at it from a different perspective. He's coming at it more from the love angle, and I'm coming at it more from the law angle, and kind of mashing those two things together. It's going to be really good. So we'll I think this is a subject we'll probably ultimately have on the show here with Popular Liberty and or Vin Armani. Yeah, he says in the chat, I didn't think it was heated. It wasn't heated between us. It was definitely heated between really only on the behalf of this Micro President guy and Vin. Vin seemed fairly annoyed by it, and this other guy was just really bent out of shape about the fact that I had the audacity to approach him with a conversation. But he kept replying to me, so I was like, well, this conversation seems to be very upsetting to you, but you keep engaging in it, so I'll keep engaging with you. It was very interesting having a conversation about what the definition of love is, or what love means in a Christian sense, with someone who is very, very angry that you don't share their definition. It was kind of ironic. There was something meta to it. But
this must be one of those times where I'll once every 5 days I'll look at my Twitter and I'll just see, it's like, oh, 2 notifications, 1 notification. 98 notifications. It must have been one of those times.
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
It was one of those times.
I don't know if I would. Yeah.
Well, speaking of your Twitter notifications, you should have a whole bunch of them right now, because I tagged you in something yesterday on Twitter because our boy Anamnesis dropped a new video. How do you like that little segue? Anamnesis just dropped a new video, and there is one channel on YouTube that you should be watching more than this one. Fortunately, it posts less often, so I'm not really at danger of losing an audience that way. But if I was to lose audience to anybody, I would want it to be Anamnesis. This guy is he's one of the best thinkers on politics and culture right now of anyone I think anyone in the world. he is approaching this from a very unique perspective. It's largely influenced by Moldbug. That's how his video series started out, was like meditations on Moldbug, I think is what he's called it. And he's something like 15 videos into it. He's been going at it for a couple of years, but his production speed has really dragged out now. He was cranking them out every couple weeks for a little while there, but now it's every several months. But when it drops, man, that's a day to party. That's a day to mark on your calendar, a day that Anamnesis dropped a video. Because his last couple have been just absolutely phenomenal videos. And a lot of the content that he's discussing now is stuff that he was influenced by Moldbug, or influenced by De Juvenel or Burnham. But a lot of these ideas are ideas that, at the very least, this way of framing them or communicating them is original to him. And he actually made a disclaimer to that effect in this last video, basically saying he didn't want to be accused of putting words in Moldbug's mouth. So he said, where it's not specifically attributed to Moldbug, just assume that these are all my ideas. And so this most recent video was about revolution and rights and activism, and why. This is funny because we were just talking about this yesterday in this branding conversation for Kingpilled. Why the tactics of the left never work for the right, and there's a specific reason for that. And it's funny because what we were talking about just yesterday was there's been people, and we'll just say people in the libertarian community who are very vocal, pseudo or many celebrities within the libertarian sphere who have been saying specifically that libertarians need to start taking notes from Saul Alinsky and need to start using Alinskyite tactics. And there's a reason why that never works. There's lots and lots of right-wing people who've tried that, and it just does not work. It's not effective for them. And I think people have a hard time understanding why that is. And the biggest, well, first of all, people who see themselves as libertarian today, by and large, the ones who are having a conversation. So if you're having a conversation like we may need to start using Alinskyite tactics to get things done, you're the type of libertarian who you may think of yourself as, oh, I'm not left or right, I'm something in the middle, but you are definitely a right-wing libertarian. Like that's those people who are in that sphere who are having that conversation. Libertarianism in general today is right-wing, or at least it comes from that perspective. It's the ideal world it's trying to describe is a right-wing world, a world where property rights are respected absolutely. That is a right-wing world. So a right-wing paradise and a libertarian paradise are essentially what they're imagining is the same thing. The problem is the libertarian means of getting there is through the application of left-wing tactics, and your tactics are what make you. So if you're using left-wing tactics to spread a right-wing message, you're spreading a left-wing message. And you can't, it doesn't matter what you want to be doing, what you're doing is you're contributing, because leftism is ultimately a collection of people who act in a specific way. And it's the people who are trying to get power, essentially. It's people who are trying to get power, and so they generate chaos to try to give themselves an opportunity to gain on the people who are already in power. And so anyways, Stephen, you put the right spelling of anamnesis in there. For those who are listening, it's ANAMNESIS. So what Anamnesis, I don't want to take away from his video. We'll probably address that at some point in the future. But basically, the case that he's making is that revolution is not revolution is not a means for overthrowing a tyrannical regime. Revolution is a means by which a tyrannical regime accumulates more power to itself. So revolutions are always sponsored. This fits right in with the circulation of the elites idea that it's never the lower classes overthrowing the upper classes. It's always one member of the upper class weaponizing the lower classes against the rest of the upper class and taking power from them. So ultimately, revolution is the way that a stronger regime undermines and takes power away from a weak regime. So when libertarians look at government, they're like, these guys are so stupid. They're so incompetent. They can't get anything done. They can't do anything right. they see that as, oh, this is a white pill. This means, oh, these people are so incompetent that it you know, we're going to be fine in the long run. And that should not be the way that you see it. You should see that as a sign of bad things to come. Because when there is a weak government, that's an opportunity for people who want power and aren't going to do anything good with it to take advantage of that weak government. And those are the people that do things, that do tyrannical things. So it's a very nuanced, very, very interesting conversation. That basically the role of government is not what anyone presumes it to be. We have this idea. He touches on this idea that you can't explain the role of a government apart from a concept of rights. And if you ask them, and if you say, okay, explain what a government does or what a government's supposed to do, but don't appeal to human rights at all, what do you come up with? And there's no answer for that. People, there's just, especially right-wing conservative people, they can't answer that question. So anyways, it's a very, very interesting conversation. I'll put a link in the comments of this episode here so that you guys can go watch that after, or listen to that after you finish with this show. And I think we'll probably have Anamnesis on this show here at some point too. He's reached out to us. We've had a conversation with him in the background. So big things are happening, and it's very fun in this very small niche corner of the internet.
If you manage not to alienate him on Twitter.
Yeah, by going and picking a fight with him.
Yeah, so just like all the guests that we have lined up, there's just going to be a little in the inside listeners group. We'll have a little tally, and we'll just say, "Oh, cross them off as we go."
Oh, Matt pissed him off. So Steven's like, "No, we're supposed to piss them off once they get on the show, not before they get here."
Yeah. Well, it's like I had a whole bit for all of them. I was going to yell at Curtis Yarvin. You know, we did throw around a couple ideas for even though when we had Anamnesis on.
Yeah, that's true.
That's inside listeners talk, though.
Yeah,
I want to put that into
that's not even for the supporting listeners group. That's for the inner circle of the supporting listeners group.
Right.
The select supporting listeners group.
I think my favorite part of that video that he put out was. And I had a conversation with a friend recently that went down like the same path. But basically in his video, he kind of talks about, the origin story of the American Revolution. And it's really convenient because right-wingers have bought into it, where, this group of people saw tyranny and they fought against it, and that's what right wingers need to do these days, right? And so it's a very convenient little trap that they've built a mansion in, and my friend was just kind of taking note that just like, oh yeah, they turned Boston Harbor into a giant teapot over this little tax. Meanwhile, look at everything that we're putting up with right now. We need to do X, Y, and Z. And, it doesn't take much more than living through the past year or even less, just to kind of look at that response and just say, you're going to die if you do that, probably.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Like, how does that make sense to you? But just the whole idea that tyranny is always looming, and anyone who wants to fight tyranny and evil needs to act politically, and not politically, needs to take part in some sort of revolution, in protest and all these things. And so it's very convenient because if the left does it, they are doing the bidding of the regime, and if the right does it, they are becoming the enemy realized. Right. That they have that the regime has spoken about.
The best.
Look, there's the Nazis right there. See them?
Right. See, look, they're showing you. Yeah. They the best way he framed that was that he said that protest is not a means of getting political power. Protest is a means of using political power. When someone is out in the streets protesting, exactly, they're victory lapping, and they may not even realize it, but they're using their political power, because only people with political power are allowed to protest. The people who don't have political power, when they go out and they try to protest, they get crushed because everyone he says that there's a loophole. Everyone has a human rights loophole. This group of people, they don't get human rights. And he goes through all these different organizations, all these different people, China and the EU and all these different Jordan Peterson. They all have a human rights loophole. Yeah,
that was intense.
Right, and he does a little bit on James Lindsay that's very, very good. And it's a very, very insightful video. And I didn't think he could top his last video. His last video on the mystery cult of power was one of the most influential things that most influential pieces of content I've ever consumed. And then he went and did it, and he did one even better. So
I think they're related though. I think they pair nicely.
Yeah, oh yeah, if you watch those two back to back, like that would be the biggest NRX pill ever. Like the neo-reactionary, and I mean I don't want to get us niched too much into the neo-reactionary thing because
I definitely don't.
There's
you can't describe Steve. You definitely can't describe Stephen Messina as anything that involves the word neo or reactionary, and certainly not both of them together. No, sir.
He is just Neo Messina.
I'm a liberal guy.
Liberal Steve. Okay, we need to get this show on the road here because we got a good bit to read. Hold on real quick. I have to go turn a fan on because I am absolutely baking and I won't be able to hear you, but you can go ahead and talk.
In the meantime, I would just like to take the opportunity to mention that my muscles really have been quite tired lately. And although I'm not wearing shorts that are short enough to show you what I do to make my muscles feel relaxed, you can be rest assured that at some point during this video, I'm going to be doing it. And I'll leave it to your imagination as to what that would entail. But I am going to relieve these tired muscles and these strong, capable, milky white thighs at some point during this reading. And what you can do if you're commenting in the live chat, comment when you think it's happening. Because again, it's going to happen at least once. And the relief that I experienced is all thanks to Paloma Verde, Pinche Paloma Verde, and their THC-free salve stick. And I just rub that, and let me tell you, I've got some thighs. You might not know it by looking at me, but I've got some pretty fat thighs. So believe me, it takes a good chunk. I've got a twist at the bottom to make sure that I have more salve stick to rub on these thighs. But you know what? I've been doing it for a good bit here, and I still got plenty left. What a fantastic sample size that I received. And you can, if you have sore muscles, probably not as sore as mine, but everyone's like pain tolerance is different. If you have sore muscles, you can visit Paloma Verde CBD.
There you go. PalomaVerdeCBD.com.
Okay. Beautiful.
Yep.
New URL. Take note, fans.
Yes.
And use promo code KING, and you will receive a hefty discount that Matt can tell you all about right now.
25% off any order over $75.
Good gravy.
That is right.
That's bananas. And I've also been using the gummies for sleep.
The best sleep that I've had in a very long time has been the last couple weeks. If you'd like to support
the show, head on over PalomaVerdeCBD.com and use promo code KING, fans.
Very, very good. That was beautiful. I'm inspired.
Thank
you. It's hard for me to focus to concentrate on it when number one, the milky thighs thing. I can't understand what you're talking about now when you're not actively rubbing it on your legs. I just can't visualize it. But the other thing
I'm gonna be
too,
actively rubbing at some point during this reading. You dollars to donuts. And you comment with a timestamp, and you'll be first in line for the supporting listeners. You'll get the first spot.
Yeah. Just make sure again that there's a new URL. They got their new site up, and their new site looks absolutely fantastic. So PalomaVerdeCBD.com. That's PalomaVerdecBD.com. Okay. I was going to go into a little thing, something I tweeted yesterday, but we don't have time. So I'm going to get this show on the road here. So I've really enjoyed doing these live readings, and it seems like by all the comments and stuff, and even people tweeting at me, people messaging me on Facebook, they all seemed like they really enjoy they really enjoy it as well. It seems like it's a format that people like. So the great thing for us is it makes it really easy. Like it's a fantastic crutch, which is a good thing and a bad thing. But I think I might have said this before, but if you're an aspiring podcaster and you want to start, just do something like this. Get an existing piece of content and just start. You can do a video if you've got the skills to put the video in there, and you can just go through and comment as you go. Just a shout out to another great thinker that I've been listening to lately, Paul Vander Clay. He's a guy that Vin Armani got me turned on to. And I really, really wish I would not have used the word turned on right then. But anyways, so Paul Vander Clay is he's a Reformed minister. I think he's in Central California somewhere. And he does a lot of commentary on just politics and religion and in general. And he talks to Jonathan Peugeot pretty often. And he just did an absolutely legendary marathon video talking about communism and Christianity and two-level theories. And he had, I don't know, half a dozen different articles and videos and stuff that he just went through and just strung this all back to back. It was over 4 hours. It was like 4.5 hours long of him just playing pieces of content and then commenting on it, pausing, commenting, playing it again, pausing, commenting. I'm almost finished with it. I haven't even finished it yet, but the last part, he does quite a bit of commentary on a podcast that Tom Holland, the author of Dominion, does, and where they're talking about the Christian roots of communism and stuff. It's just some of the most fascinating stuff that I've ever listened to. And if you go watch that video, that 4.5 hour video by Paul Vander Clay, you'll basically kind of get a preview for some of the stuff that I'll be talking about over the next couple of months, because this is all the stuff that just dominates my mind nowadays. So that's just another shout out there. Paul Vander Clay. It's VanderKlay. Vander Clay with a K. Okay, so Moldbug, Patchwork. So we started with the first live reading series that we did for anyone who's new. We did the Mises to Carlyle series that Moldbug did, which is 3 chapters. And each chapter is quite long. Because he's a very, very wordy fellow. One thing I was talking to, I think it was Mark Clare from Lions of Liberty, was commenting, and he said that he likes this because it's hard for him to read, especially something that's that long and drawn out, and especially the writing style that Moldbug has. And I said, I definitely understand why there's people who may not enjoy it. But to me, it's art. Like, it's a form of art. And art is subjective. Some people like it, some people don't. But Moldbug is not just writing to communicate information. He's doing it almost as a performance, like a performance piece. And he's embedding information in there. And for me, the way that he performs it is like if someone just kind of described a historical event to me, I'd be kind of like, oh, okay. But if they put it into a movie and I watch the movie, I'm going to remember it way better. And that's sort of how it is for me reading his stuff. The way that he writes, the way he embeds it in this kind of conversational narrative style, it really makes it stick for me. I really enjoy it. So anyway, I'm glad that for the people who have a hard time reading it, that it's easier for them to listen to it. I kind of hope that might be the case. And we're going to keep doing these here. And we'll branch into other stuff other than Moldbug. We'll do some Nick Land probably. I just saw that there's this YouTube channel that I've hesitated to tell people about because it does live readings of all kinds of stuff like this using just an artificial intelligence computer voice. But it's one of the best that I've seen so far. And I've hesitated telling people about it because I was like, well, I don't want to like send people away from our thing. I want people to come listen to our readings of it. But it's just a straight read through. It's no commentary. It's not a live reading. So I think I'll just tell people about it. And I can't even remember the name of the channel right now. It's Skeptical Waves or something like that. But I'll put a link to it in the. Is that what it is? Skeptical Waves. Okay, so I'll put a link to that in the description afterwards. So if you guys want to go and if you want to skip ahead and go listen to anything there, if it's easier for you to do audio rather than reading yourself, then that's the way to go. And he's got Spandrel, he's got Nick Land. He just did Bioleninism, the series that Spandrel did. He's got Nick Land, he's got Gray Mirror, he's got Unqualified Reservations, he's got a whole bunch of stuff over there. So he's doing really, really good work, and we're going to do a different thing. So we're going to do a live reading, doing commentary as we go. And the Patchwork series is the one where Moldbug, it's kind of a less common one. You have to be a real enthusiast to have read Patchwork, it seems. Most people have read The Open Letter or A General Introduction. A lot of people have read Mises to Carlyle. A lot of people have read how Dawkins got pwned. But it seems I don't hear people talking about Patchwork as often. And this is where Moldbug actually really goes into a lot of detail on the type of society that he envisions. Like if you applied his ideas to an actual governmental system, what would it look like? And now he's very clear to say this is not. He's not advocating this necessarily. He's just describing it, just as an interesting thought exercise. This is how you could structure it. This is how you could go about it. These are the sorts of questions that you would have to deal with. From an engineering perspective, how would you create a joint stock corporation that functions like a form of a sovereign monarchy? This is how you would do it. So he has a 4-part series on it.
It's really great, especially if you're someone who's you're one of these dumb people who heard monarchy and thinks he's bringing back, horse-drawn carriages and like scepters and crowns and stuff like that. If you're one of those dum-dums who thought that way and then were really surprised that that's not what he was talking about, this might be really good for you. If you're not smart like me and definitely didn't think that that's what he was talking about when you first heard monarchy and reject the idea immediately.
I keep, as he says in Mises to Carlyle, I wish I'd remembered this, and I'm going to start using it more. He'll say royalist instead of monarchist, just because monarchist is such a loaded term, and you're specifically like, he obviously wouldn't advocate the traditional form of monarchy, because what happened when the traditional form of monarchy was implemented was you wound up with democracy. Like democracy is a product of that system, so it's downstream from it, and it's an indicator of the weaknesses that were in that system. So you can't just go back to the same thing again. But there was also a baby with the bathwater thing that happened, where there were issues with that system that needed to be reformed. A lot of it had to do with cultural or social reforms, but there was a lot that had to do with technological reforms. There was just some sorts of governance processes that just weren't possible because of lack of technology. And now that we have technology, it could theoretically be more possible. But now we've got all this extra social baggage that we have to wade through. So anyways, enough of that. We're going to get into it here because it's a little bit long. So we want to try to keep this under 2 hours if possible. So let us get started. So this is Patchwork, a political system for the 21st century. Chapter 1, a positive vision. Mencius Moldbug, November 13, 2008. I'm afraid unqualified reservations has been a bit, grim of late. One can flirt only so long with Confederate racist fascism, to which he links to a piece of his called America, Vampire of the World, Part 1. When he says Confederate racist fascism, just for anyone who hasn't read it before, he's being tongue-in-cheek, because that's what he gets accused of. He gets accused of being a Confederate racist fascist. The same sense that the rest of us are all Confederate racist fascists. So he says one can flirt only so long with Confederate racist fascism before eliciting a few jitters. Is our reader really going to be dragged into this horrible subterranean universe? Is she even comfortable having it on her computer at work? And then we took this awful, bumpy ride into the eel-infested deeps of Obama derangement syndrome, which can't have helped matters. And that one he links to a piece called Did Barack Obama Go to Colombia? And at the top of that, it says, update, please see the following post, which says another interpretation of Obama at Colombia. This is interesting. I haven't actually read these, so I'm going to go read those later on. But anyways... So he says, we took this awful bumpy ride into the eel-infested deeps of Obama derangement syndrome, which can't have helped matters. So, in this installment, I thought it'd be nice to be positive. Therefore, let me present Patchwork, the mensest vision of a political system for the 21st century. At the risk of being accused of a sales job, I will paint Patchwork in warm, glowing, Obamatronic pastels, rather than our usual chilly Machiavellian cynicism. Yes, I know this is unfair, but here at UR, we are always closing. To start the hype machine, let's just say that if anyone can build anything like Patchwork, even a tiny, crude third-world ripoff of Patchwork, it is all over for the democratic regimes. It'll be like East Germany competing with West Germany. Funnily enough, the financial relationship between the US and the Gulf/East Asia, the most Patchwork-like part of the world at present, is oddly reminiscent of that between the OECD and the Warsaw Pact. The latter borrow from the former to buy cheap consumer goods, supplied by the former for the latter's serfs. So to put that in clearer language, he's saying that the relationship between the U.S. and the Gulf states in East Asia, so Saudi Arabia to Afghanistan, India, that range, is similar to that between the OECD, which was the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which was founded in 1961 as an intergovernmental economic organization with 37 member countries, founded to stimulate economic progress and world trade. It's basically a mafia. And the Warsaw Pact, which was the Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance, commonly known as the Warsaw Pact, which was a collective defense treaty signed in Warsaw, Poland, between the Soviet Union and 7 other Eastern Bloc socialist republics of Central and Eastern Europe in May of 1955 during the Cold War. It was the military complement to the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance and the Regional Economic Organization for the Socialist States of Central and Eastern Europe. It was created in reaction to the integration of West Germany into NATO in 1955, per the London and Paris conferences of 1954. It was established as a balance of power to counterweight to NATO. So the latter, so in that case, the Warsaw Pact, or the Eastern Bloc states, borrow from the former. So basically, it was basically like the U.S. and all of its client states, in order to buy cheap consumer goods, which are supplied by the former for the latter's serfs. So children growing up in the Patchwork era will learn a new name and a new history of the democratic past. They will date the period to the Dutch invasion of England, 1688, which ended the span of legitimate continuity in English government that began with William the Conqueror. So basically, he's saying that this democratic era that we live in today, this era of democracy in general, he's basically saying that it began in 1688 with the Dutch invasion of England. And that ended the span of legitimate continuity in English government that began with William the Conqueror. And let me see what year William the Conqueror was. 1028 to 1087. So it was a 600 year span, basically, of English government, and it replaced it with eternal degenerate Whiggery and the quizzling constitutional or ceremonial Hanover princes. And they will surely call it something cool, like the Anglo-American interregnum. Insulting it with the name of democracy will be coarse and over the top, implying that, in this future hypothetical world, as they look back on this era, that's just going to be an interregnum. Everyone went and experimented with this democracy thing, and democracy is now it's like a bad word. You insult someone by calling them a Democrat. So this is the hypothetical world where the Moldbugian view has taken over and become the most popular view. So at that point, calling someone a Democrat would be considered coarse and over the top. Said interregnum, which we are of course still in, has been a period of global monotonic decline in official authority. As in the late Roman period, declining official authority, declining personal morality, and increasing public bureaucracy are observed in synchrony. This is not in any way a coincidence. So official authority is declining in power, personal morality is declining in power, and public bureaucracy is increasing. And all of these things are all happening simultaneously, and he said that this isn't a coincidence. That combination of declining official authority, declining personal morality, and increasing public bureaucracy is an infallible symptom of the great terminal disease of the polity, leftism. Leftism is cancer. At least in its present adult sclerotic and non-fulminating form, it is extremely slow in its progress, but the end is not in doubt. Now remember, this was being written in 2008, so this is being written 13 years ago, and this was written in November of 2008, so it was just like right at the very beginning of the economic collapse, of the crisis. So he's saying right now, this leftism thing is extremely slow in its progress. So, 2008, November of 2008 would have been, Obama was just elected. This was like just at the very, very beginning of Obama's term. So this is basically George Bush's era. It's fascinating to think of. That seems like a completely different world now, George Bush's term in office. That was 13 years ago. That's when he's writing. So actually just over 12 years. So at this present state, leftism is sclerotic and in its non-fulminating form. It's extremely slow in its progress, but the end is not in doubt. It's no question where it's headed. On theoretical grounds alone, the feat has never really been achieved, at least never for good. The only cure for leftism is complete and permanent excision. Success implies complete absence of the organism from the body politic. Now, this does not mean that there are no leftists in the country. In a well-governed country, which is at peace, people can think or say whatever they damned well please. It just means that if there are, for some reason, leftists, their views are completely without influence on government policy. So people laugh at them and call them names. Isn't this a lovely vision? A Lenin-esque feat of delirious constructive imagination? By Lenin, he means John Lennon. A Lenin-esque feat of delirious constructive imagination? A world without leftism? Imagine. It's hard to imagine only if you have trouble imagining a Nazi John Lennon, a feat which taxes my imagination not at all. But maybe I've been reading too much Hitler. It really is a tough call to say who was more coherent, John Lennon or Adolf Hitler. Acceptance of this goal, which I will not attempt to justify yet, but which I think Patchwork can achieve, is the difference between a conservative, i.e., a fellow who thinks he can beat melanoma with an emery board, and a full-bore reactionary such as myself. If you happen to be wrong, you have leaped the rail of sanity. So it is incumbent on us to argue carefully. But I'm sorry. I'm being intentionally abrasive again. As an extremist, I prefer this harsh confrontational rhetoric to any kind of honeyed cousining. The basic goal of UR, I don't mind admitting, is to convince people who are now progressives to abandon their delusions. Since progressives equate those who accept the reactionary narrative of recent history with acolytes of the great goat lord Abaddon, one must tread carefully. And if you must come as an Abaddonite, the only way to set your quarry at ease is to constantly confess your vileness. That way the progressive might even just clasp you to his heart, along with all the other satanic murderers he is so keen to embrace. Consider, for instance, the case of Jose Luis Durantes, who was hit and run, death in a sanctuary city. It was one of the strangest hit and runs police had ever seen in Austin, Texas. Early last September, officers answering a call at 4:19 a.m. found a young man dead along a highway. They surmised he was a motorcyclist. He was, after all, wearing motorcycle garb. A helmet, black leather jacket, boots. A few hundred feet away, officers spotted a single skid mark running down the highway and disappearing from sight. Oddly, no motorcycle could be found. A check of the victim's driver's license revealed his name, Eric M. Laffer. Laffer was a highly regarded musician and songwriter in Austin, and unlike many musicians here, the graduate of Boston's prestigious Berklee College of Music was politically conservative. Laffer's political leanings and interest in politics were a new passion, say his friends. He'd enthusiastically supported the presidential candidacy of Representative Ron Paul, the Republican congressman from Texas, who, among other positions, advocated a get-tough policy on illegal immigration and border security. Laffer made no secret of his political views, even though Open Borders Austin is a bastion of ultra-liberal politics, and often extremely intolerant of Republicans. This is in 2008. On his Harley-Davidson, he prominently displayed a campaign sticker, Ron Paul for President 2008. And even after Paul dropped out of the race months ago, Laffer continued sporting the sticker. It was on his motorcycle when he died. The victim, ironically, of an undocumented worker who was probably from Mexico. Laffer's motorcycle was rear-ended by an SUV traveling at a tremendous rate of speed. He was killed instantly. Laffer died amid an epidemic of deadly hit-and-runs in pro-Obama Austin, the state capital. The epidemic is being fueled in part by illegal immigrants and unassimilated young Hispanics. Young men who, according to police statistics, engage in drunk driving in this city of 740,000 much more frequently than any other ethnic and racial groups. And then I thought there was more details about the story itself. Okay, yeah. And the police investigation into Laffer's death says much about life in a sanctuary city and about how Austin's open borders policy has negatively affected its culture and quality of life. And if Laffer's death reflects national trends, the hit-and-run driver who killed him will never face justice. In Austin and elsewhere, most hit-and-runs remain unsolved. Often they occur at night, where there are few, if any, witnesses. Police investigating Laffer's death, however, got a lucky break into their investigation on Thursday, September 4. At the end of a solitary skid mark extending for 1.16 miles, officers found Laffer's shattered 2003 Harley-Davidson Sportster. And wedged between the ground-up rear tire and motorcycle's frame, they found a crumpled license plate with the plate number. It was registered to a 1995 GMC Yukon. The owner lived nearby. Going to the apartment complex, they found the SUV. It had front-end damage consistent with a collision with a motorcycle, and the front license plate was missing. It wasn't until the following Sunday that detectives determined exactly how Laffer died after they temporarily closed a major highway to investigate Austin's biggest crime scene in memory involving a fatal hit-and-run. But for now, they were anxious to question the owner of the GMC Yukon. Inside the owner's apartment, officers found what Detective Francois called a fairly typical scene in such cases. A 2- or 3-bedroom unit occupied by a number of Spanish-speaking men and women, all presumably from Mexico. None spoke English. Detective Francois posed no questions about their immigration status. In sanctuary cities like Austin, that's how things are done. And there's a reason for this, say top police commanders. If police enforced immigration laws, they contend, illegal immigrants would be reluctant to report crimes and to cooperate with police. Officers thus asked only about who had been driving the Yukon. It was Jose Luis Durantes, they were told. He'd borrowed the vehicle. However, quote, nobody could tell us what he was doing that night or why he had the vehicle, Detective Francois related in response to specific questions. He added, they cooperated just enough to stay out of trouble. In such cases, it's a typical reaction. Being minimally cooperative, he said. And how did the group react when told the Yukon had killed an American on a motorcycle? The detective found them utterly indifferent. I didn't see any emotion out of any one of them. No shock, no disbelief, no question of where or when or anything. It's the reaction I've seen before, he said, explaining it may be due to certain cultural issues. He didn't elaborate, but such cultural issues are addressed in a training manual used at an Austin Police Academy. It's a Berlitz-style guide on Spanish language and culture. Latinos, it states, will most likely side with each other than an outsider. An individual will assist family members and friends regardless of the consequences and expect the same in return. A sense of honor is so important in Latino culture that it may keep an individual from cooperating with the police against a friend or family members, even though he or she may not condone any of the actions. Nobody, supposedly, had any idea where Durantes had gone, but officers at least learned that he did menial work at a local restaurant, one that Detective Francois called pretty well established. Detectives who went there got a reaction they've come to expect. People said as little as possible. According to Detective Francois, local businesses are usually cooperative when police show up about an undocumented worker who's a crime suspect. However, most would rather that I force their hand to obtain information. This may be for a variety of reasons. Concerns over lawsuits, advice from lawyers, or due to corporate policy, he said. Accordingly, he routinely obtains a subpoena requiring a business to be forthcoming. The detective declined to mention the restaurant's name since the hit-and-run case remains open. Who is Jose Luis Durantes? Police only know he's 20 years old, is probably a Mexican, and, quote, I wouldn't be surprised if he was here illegally, related Detective Francois. Police couldn't find any documentation on him, he said. No Texas driver's license or other ID. It's what police often find in hit-and-run cases involving undocumented workers, he said. Determining the identity of an undocumented worker like Durantes is problematic for two reasons. For one thing, Austin's police have no access to Mexico's driver's license database. Second, they lack seamless access to every U.S. state driver's license database. Two things about Durantes seem certain. He knew early on that police were looking for him. His roommates and pals at work no doubt tipped him off about all the gringo cops asking about him. Moreover, he won't be turning himself into police. Accordingly, Austin's police obtained an arrest warrant for Durantes 16 days after he disappeared. The warrant went into a nationwide law enforcement database. So if police detain Durantes anywhere in the U.S., perhaps for a routine traffic violation, a computer check will show he's wanted by Austin's police for felony manslaughter and failure to stop and render aid to an injured person. Catching Durantes like this, of course, presumes he's still using the name Jose Luis Durantes, if that ever was his real name, and it presumes he's not in Mexico. Laffer's death generated significant coverage in the local media. Yet, curiously, not a single news outlet mentioned anything about Durantes' problematic immigration status, even though the vehicular homicide unit's main contact in the case, Detective Francois, was accessible and happy to answer questions. How to explain this? In open border cities like Austin, members of the news media are part of the ruling and intellectual elites. Democrats and Republicans alike, these elites consider themselves part of a global economy, one in which national borders are a nuisance. Accordingly, Durantes' problematic immigration status is considered irrelevant, not worth a mention. He had a right to be here as far as they're concerned. Days after Laufer's death, the Austin American-Statesman ran a trend story about fatal hit-and-run epidemic. Laufer was the 11th person killed by a hit-and-run driver up until his death. Austin had suffered 151 hit-and-runs that caused injury or death through July 28, the daily paper reported. In each of the previous 2 years, there were 286. It's a significant problem, Police Chief Art Acevedo remarked. But those hit-and-run figures fail to tell the whole story, noted Detective Francois. What the public hears about from the media and what is actually happening is very different. There are between 800 and 1,000 leaving the scene collisions every month, but the ones you generally hear about are only those involving serious injuries and death. And it goes on to discuss the immigration issue more. I went and made sure I read that whole story because you understand the allusion that he's making when he brings him up. So to go back just briefly, he said, but I'm sorry, I'm being intentionally abrasive again. As an extremist, I prefer this harsh confrontational rhetoric to any kind of honeyed cousining. The basic goal of I don't mind admitting, is to convince people who are now progressives to abandon their delusions. Since progressives equate those who accept the reactionary narrative of recent history with acolytes of the great goat Lord Abaddon, one must tread carefully. And if you must come as an Abaddonite, the only way to set your quarry at ease is to constantly confess your vileness. That way the progressive might even just clasp you to his heart, along with all the satanic murderers he is so keen to embrace. Consider, for instance, the case of Jose Luis Durantes. Masters, mighty masters, Lord Barak, Lady Michelle, and their puppy too. Father who art in heaven, your lordships, how have we offended you? When did we sin? What penance must we pay? Which word of yours did we cross, to have a Jose Luis Durantes inflicted on us? And how in grievous error may we repent? Another diversity training session, perhaps? Or 3? Anyway, obviously I'm just trying to get you wound up, dear reader. I'm sorry. I know, it's crass. So let's have a look at Patchwork. The basic idea of Patchwork is that as the crappy governments we inherited from history are smashed, they should be replaced by a global spiderweb of tens, even hundreds, of thousands of sovereign and independent many countries, each governed by its own joint stock corporation without regard to the residents' opinions. If residents don't like their government, they can and should move. The design is all exit and no voice, which is a reference to a book written by Albert O. Hirschman in 1970 called Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. The work hinges on a conceptual ultimatum that confronts consumers in the face of deteriorating quality of goods, either exit or voice. So basically, you can either leave or you can speak up and try to make a difference. So what he's describing is that his vision of the of Patchwork would be that it would be all exit. Your opinions don't matter at all. In the actual running of the thing. Like if you want to make your voice heard or whatever, all right, you're welcome to go talk to the wall, but nobody's going to pay attention to you. We're doing what we're doing. This is the way this place is run. And if you don't like it, you're perfectly free to go find another one that's run according to your preferences. So it's all exit, no voice. He says, I'm not aware of any specific writer that has proposed exactly this, but it is certainly not an original or interesting idea in and of itself. I've certainly read about 6 zillion science fiction books in which this is the general state of the future. The devil, however, is in the details. We will go into the details. The essential inspiration for Patchwork is the observation that the periods in which human civilization has flowered are the periods in which it has been the most politically divided. Ancient Greece, medieval Italy, Europe until 1914, China in the spring and autumn period, and so on. Burckhardt once observed that Europe was safe so long as she was not unified. And now that she is, we can see exactly what he meant. Small is good. Local is good. Different is good. We know these things. These are not controversial assertions, even in the hippest streets of Williamsburg. Heck, President Obama is probably a slow food man himself, Slow Food being an organization that promotes local food and traditional cooking. Once, my daughter, aged 4 months, was in a bakery in the Castro and met Alice Waters. Alice Waters smiled and told her she was very cute, which she is. She might as well be on the Gerber bottle. And Alice Waters might as well be a duchess. Heck, Alice Waters probably laughs at duchesses. So how exactly did all these Obama-maniacs, these whiter people, where he links to stuff white people like, these Burning Man regulars, these young, hip progressives, convince themselves that when it comes to government, bigger is better? That, in fact, we need a world government toot sweet. That international public opinion is all that really matters in the world, that America should lead the world, feed the world, and be governed by the world. But somehow they did. The issues that matter to them, the composition of the atmosphere question, and the like, always tend to be transnational, as big as possible. And, as Peter Gabriel put it in the song Big Time, they think big thoughts. We reactionaries, when we act locally, would rather think locally as well. Always best to think about what you're actually doing. This paradox is just one more stimulus for a complete replacement of the state. We have had enough. We are done with the present system of government. We want a reboot. And anarchy being both impossible and unreactionary, we can't even talk about a reboot until we've specified what operating system to boot next. So we can think of Patchwork as a new operating system for the world. Of course, it does not have to be installed across the entire world, although it is certainly designed to scale. But it is easier and much more prudent to start small. Innovations and sovereignty are dangerous. A patchwork, please feel free to drop the capital P, is a network consisting of a large number of small but independent states. To be precise, each state's real estate is its patch. The sovereign corporate owner, i.e. government, of the patch is its realm. At least initially, each realm holds only one and only one patch. In practice, this may change with time, but the realm patch structure is at least designed to be stable. Of course, Italy in the 14th century was anything but stable. Anything like a patchwork needs a strong security design to ensure that it does not repeat the constitutional solecisms of feudalism, nor will it be subject to the same pervasive violence or meet the same demise. In a worst-case scenario, we could end up right back at liberal democracy. But don't worry, we will discuss this issue in considerable detail. To be a reactionary is not to say that we must reinstall the exact political structure of the 14th century tomorrow, although that would surely be an improvement on what we have now. To be a reactionary is to borrow freely across time as well as space. incorporating political designs and experience from wherever and whenever. As Nick Szabo has observed, the most interesting, detailed, and elegant European forms are found in the period we call feudal, and thus it is only natural that a reactionary design for future government will have a somewhat feudal feel. But patchwork is something new. It will not feel like the past. It will feel like the future. The past, that is the democratic past, will feel increasingly gray, weird, and scary. This is how it would feel to you already if you didn't have a big bag of demotic morphine dripping into each carotid. Don't worry, we will try to get you out of the matrix before we turn off the anesthetic. And just for reference again, demotic is a bit of a neologism for him, a word he kind of made up, I think. And what his intent in demotic is to basically refer to all things democracy. It's a broader term than just democratic. It's the state of being democratic, kind of. So he made up the word demotic to kind of take the baggage out of it. So he's saying if you were looking at the democratic world right now, it would already feel gray and weird and scary to you, except that you have demotic morphine dripping into each one of your carotids. In the future, the fact that once you would probably be attacked if you went into Central Park at night will seem preposterous. The idea that millions of random people who were not even authorized to be in the country were wandering around, driving gigantic SUVs at triple-digit speeds after 10 or 15 drinks, and murdering random musicians on motorcycles will seem as weird as the idea that a pride of wild lions could march into Carnegie Hall mid-symphony, close off all exits, and systematically slaughter the audience. Graffiti will be a matter for the museums, as will gangs, of course. The streets will have no cars, or very few. They will be safe. At night, they will be bright and full of lively, happy people. Wine will be cheap, restaurants will be unregulated, and fine Eskimo marijuana will be sold at Dean and DeLuca, etc., etc., etc. These kinds of descriptions apply to the kind of patch I would like to live in. They may or may not seem intriguing or attractive to anyone else. You may prefer to live in a gritty, urban patch which is corrupt, dirty, dangerous, and generally difficult to live in. If there are enough people like you, there will be a market for this lifestyle. If not, not. I suspect, however, that you are outnumbered. And I imagine the new management of Manhattan would take the distance from Dinkins to Giuliani and multiply it by 10 or 20. There would be surely no such thing as a bad neighborhood, at least in the sense of an unsafe one. Oh no, absolutely impossible. Why hasn't this happened already? Why isn't Manhattan in 2008 half Disneyland, half Paris, half Imperial Sodom? Don't you think one or two people share these tastes? But the problem is that Manhattan is not governed in the interests of Manhattan. Capital, in short, is being squandered. In the patchwork, this is most unlikely to happen. The historical and political reasons why democratic governments are such a mess are complex. I won't go into them today, but perhaps for a little intuitive perspective, let's introduce ourselves to Herbert Crawley's Promise of American Life. Crawley was one of the founders of 20th century progressivism, and of the New Republic in specific, a magazine never out of favor in the corridors of Washington. Observe the extent to which Crawley's optimistic, energetic vision of positive change has decayed into the superficially happy but contentless and enervating hippie Starbucks Unitarian mien of his 21st century successors at the same office. I have linked directly to Crawley's conclusion, which is all you really need to read anyway. Here is a typical breathless passage. Now he's quoting from Crawley. Do we lack culture? We will make it hum by founding a new university in Chicago. Is American art neglected and impoverished? We will enrich it by organizing art departments in our colleges and popularize it by lectures with lantern slides and associations for the study of its history. Is New York City ugly? Perhaps, but if we could only get the authorities to appropriate a few $100 million for its beautification, we could make it look like a combination of Athens, Florence, and Paris. Is it desirable for the American citizen to be something of a hero? I will encourage heroes by establishing a fund whereby they shall be rewarded in cash. War is hell, is it? I will work for the abolition of hell by calling a convention and passing a resolution denouncing its iniquities. I will build at The Hague a palace of peace which shall be a standing rebuke to the warlords of Europe. Here in America, some of us have more money than we need and more goodwill. We will spend the money in order to establish the reign of the good, the beautiful, and the true. End quote. Athens, Florence, and Paris. Imagine a progressive today saying he wanted to turn anything, let alone New York of all God's Aegean stables, into Athens, Florence, and Paris. Imagine telling Herbert Crawley that in 2008, progressivism had triumphed beyond his wildest dreams, that the stick-in-the-mud isolationists of the Midwest were forever defeated and heard of no more, that Tammany was a schoolbook memory, that all agents of government now operate under the close supervision of the universities and the press. And then imagine trying to explain that despite all of this, NYC looks more like a combination of Paris, East Berlin, and Port-au-Prince, and is in many places extremely dangerous at night. What on earth would the good man tell you? What would he even begin to say? I don't know, but I'd sure as heck like to find out. The good, the beautiful, and the true. The patch in Patchwork that is Manhattan, however, would be the good, the beautiful, and the true. The Athens, the Florence, and the Paris. Because Athens, Florence, and Paris sell. Even Imperial Sodom sells. East Berlin doesn't sell, and Port-au-Prince really doesn't sell. The foreign forgotten lesson we are extracting from Crawley is not that progressivism is the cure for all ills, but that progressivism, the eternal poisonous chameleon, in its 1911 incarnation, espoused the civic values of 1911. All the better to convince its innocent hosts that it was anything but a lethal parasite. But we are very good at reading progressive discourse, and when we read Crawley, we see the values of 1911, not the malignant expansion of the state that Crawley was trying to justify in the names of those values. Our lesson is just that the civic values of 1911 are the naive, obvious values of good government. At the very least, they are far less warped than their post-1945 replacements. Thus, they are at least a fair proxy for the values of competitive government. And there he links to econlib.org, the econlog blog, and The Case for Competitive Government written by Arnold Kling. Athens, Florence, and Paris sounds pretty good to me, although there has to be some kind of room for industrial death metal and heavy-duty psychedelics. But this does not mean you need to worry about being raped and killed by some barbarian thug on your way home from the club. Anyway, enough anecdotes and generalities, let's take a harder engineering look at the anatomy of Patchwork. The basic engineering problem is, while one can fantasize ad libitum about the way in which this system should be governed, how will it actually be governed? The entire problem can be described as one of security.
When you think of Moldbug, it's you kind of just think of this like this big brain guy, and just sort of a guy who really should be sort of a San Francisco liberal, but he's not for whatever reason. And then you read some of the stuff, and it's just like, this guy is pretty, as the kids would say, based.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and you just with the packaging, you sometimes forget, and then you read him a little bit, and you're like, oh, yep.
Especially his gray mirror stuff.
You're way over. Whew. Yeah, he's way over there.
Yeah. Okay. Just checked on the comments a little bit. You guys are doing good over here. This is interesting. Vincent says, anyone have any thoughts about Prospera? Prospera is a private city being built off the coast of Honduras. We talked about it on Wealth, Power, and Influence with Jason Stapleton several weeks ago, and it's very interesting. Peter Thiel, I know, is somehow obliquely involved in the funding for it or something like that. But it looks like a very, very interesting experiment, and they're creating their own little sovereign realm, and they have their own system of taxation and their own. It's all based on common law, and it looks very, very interesting. So it seems pretty similar to this Patchwork thing. I think it's different because it's still. When I read through it, it seemed like it's still attempting to kind of create a more or less it expresses democratic values kind of in it. So it seems like it's a step in the right direction, but I'd be kind of surprised if it actually became a thing like Patchwork. But it definitely seems similar. And Vincent says here's that he's pretty sure Yarvin, huh?
Are they seasteading?
No, it's an actual island that the island doesn't tip over or anything.
So would they? This is sort of like a free state project, but in Honduras.
Yeah. Well, it's like a free state project, except it seems like it's by people who have actually thought more than a single bong rip about it. And Vincent says that he's pretty sure Yarvin very subtly alluded to it in a podcast a little over a year ago. I would really be curious to hear that. If you remember where the podcast is.
Too, Vincent. Why don't you drop it in the comments, buddy?
Yeah. do that for us. And if you can't find it, you can just reach out to us. You can DM it to me on Twitter or something at RealKingPilled, or you can't get it to Steven, but you could get it to his evil twin, Liberal Steve. He's on Twitter at Messina Inc.
Liberal Steve is going to look at his Twitter notifications and get some small amount of anxiety and never look at whatever you say, because I'm going to presume that it's Matthew alienating somebody.
Okay, back to this. So, the basic engineering problem of Patchwork is, while one can fantasize ad libitum about the way in which the system should be governed, how will it actually be governed? This entire problem can be described as one of security. We postulate some structure of authority for the patchwork. It sounds good. If the above propaganda is not appealing to you, all I can say is that we have very different tastes and perspectives. But is the result stable? If we set it up in some state, will it remain in that state? Stability and security are the same thing. If the structure of authority changes in any authorized way, it is not really changing at all. The designers of the Constitution of 1789 were political engineers too. They were neither stupid, nor ignorant, nor inexperienced. But the government they designed diverged immediately and irreversibly from the envelope in which they intended it to operate. Excuse me. Surely the risk of divergence is even greater for a multipolar framework, not an architecture with a good historical record of stability. Anything like a patchwork can merge into a single centralized state. It can degenerate into an asymmetric form in which one state dominates the others. It can split into two factions which fight a civil war for the world. Individual states can turn evil and try to turn others evil, etc. History tells us that all kinds of awful stuff can happen and probably will. Because of these dangers, Patchwork's philosophy of security is simple and draconian. It is built around the following axioms, which strike me as too self-evident to debate. First, security is a monotonic desideratum. There is no such thing as too secure. And just for those of you, I'm going to look at the definition of both of those words. So monotonic is a mathematics term of a function or a quantity varying in such a way that it either never decreases or never increases. One tone, monotonic. A desideratum is something that is needed or wanted, a requirement or a prerequisite. So security is a monotonic desideratum. There is no such thing as too secure. An encryption algorithm cannot be too strong. A fence cannot be too high. A bullet cannot be too lethal. Second, security and liberty do not conflict. Security always wins. As Robert Peel put it, and Robert Peel, the Peelian principles, which summarize the ideas that Sir Robert Peel developed to define an ethical police force. The approach expressed in these principles is commonly known as policing by consent. In the United Kingdom and other countries such as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, in this model of policing, police officers are regarded as citizens in uniform. As Robert Peel put it, the absence of crime and disorder is the test of public safety. And in anything like the modern state, the risk of private infringement on private liberties far exceeds the risk of public infringement. No cop ever stole my bicycle. And this will be far more true in the patchwork, in which realms actually compete for business on the basis of customer service. It's interesting that that has definitely changed over the course of the last couple of years, probably. I mean, people are kind of like, well, no cop's ever stolen my bicycle. With all this emphasis on police brutality and all of that kind of thing, it seems like that's different, but compare the rates of violent crime not by cops with the instances of police brutality by cops. And you're going to see that there's just, it's not, you're describing two fundamentally different things. So you're much more likely to be victimized by someone other than the cops.
Yeah, and then go watch Anamnesis's most recent video, and maybe the one before it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm just seeing this, my brain shut off. But Bill Gates, I guess, tweeted out that his marriage is ending, and asked for, when a whole bunch of bullshit about their house, they're still going to work together with the foundation, and then asked for space and privacy after a paragraph of writing about how he and Melinda are getting a divorce. And I don't, my brain doesn't know what to do with that.
Is this
it's supposed to do something with it?
You're like, this is real?
Yeah. Being libertarian just Posted
Interesting.
a shot of the tweet. Yeah, 4:30 p.m. May 3rd, 2021.
Huh.
Uh,
Very, very,
it seemingly
very
is real.
interesting. It is. It's the number one trend right now. Bill Gates announces that he and his wife of 27 years, Melinda, are ending their marriage. Interesting.
I don't know. I know.
I
Maybe
don't.
that means nothing. But
Yeah.
my brain's trying to look for whatever that means right now.
That has to
I don't
mean.
know.
Yeah. There's something. Oh, that creeps me out. Those people just. There.
Yeah.
Very few things creep me out like Bill and Melinda Gates.
Right.
I don't like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I know it's bad, whatever it is. It's always bad. It's always
Just
bad.
assume it's bad. Okay, so going back again. So Patchwork's philosophy of security is simple and draconian. It's built around the following axioms. First, security is a monotonic desideratum. There's no such thing as too secure. Second, liberty and security do not conflict. Security always wins. So this will be far more true in the Patchwork, in which realms actually compete for business on the basis of customer service. Third, security and complexity are opposites. A secure authority structure is as simple as possible, so that it is as difficult as possible to pervert it to unanticipated ends. Bearing these principles in mind, let's separate our security overview into two parts: the internal management of realms and the relationships between realms. A patchwork realm is a business, a corporation. Its capital is the patch it is sovereign over. The realm profits by making its real estate as valuable as possible, whether it is Manhattan or some ranch in Oklahoma. Even the oceans can and should be divided into patches. A naval realm is sovereign over and profits by taxing all economic activities within a patch of ocean. But how should realms be administered? The answer is simple. A realm is a corporation. A sovereign corporation, granted, but a corporation nonetheless. In the 17th century, the art of corporate design is not a mystery. The corporation is owned and controlled by its anonymous shareholders. If you've ever wondered what the letters SA stand for in the name of a French or Spanish company, they mean Anonymous Society. And yeah, okay, just clarifies that. Okay, so the corporation is owned and controlled by its anonymous shareholders, whose interests in maximizing corporate performance are perfectly aligned. The shareholders select a chief executive to whom all employees report and whose decisions are final. In no cases do they make management decisions directly. It is at least probable that this joint stock design maximizes corporate efficiency. If there existed a more effective structure, if firms were more productive when managed not by a committee but by an executive, or by the collective decisions of their customers or employees, by separate legislative and judiciary branches, etc., we would know. Someone would have found a way to construct a firm on this design, and it would have outcompeted the rest of the stodgy old world. In fact, I think one of the most plausible explanations of why the Industrial Revolution happened in England, not in Sung China or the Roman Empire, was that the latter two never evolved anything quite like the joint stock company. Our great difficulty, though, is that history records nothing quite like a sovereign joint stock company. Perhaps the closest examples were the chartered companies of the classical era, but even a colonial chartered company was chartered by a sovereign, though it operated outside that sovereign's realm. So you had some sort of sovereign state, say Great Britain. They chartered the Hudson Bay Company, and then the Hudson Bay Company operated in Canada and the United States, even though some of the area where it was chartered, where it operated, wasn't necessarily the territory of the British Empire. So the Hudson Bay Company wasn't sovereign. Ultimately, they responded to the British Empire. Obviously, once you get into practice, then there's different people of different levels of power within those organizations. And so just because you're a representative of the British Empire doesn't mean you're necessarily the sovereign decision maker in a given area. But the point remains that the Hudson Bay Company derives its authority from its charter, which was given to it by the British Empire. Rather, I think that the best way to think of a realm or sovereign corporation is as a modified version of monarchy. A royal family is to an ordinary family business as a patchwork realm is to an ordinary non-sovereign public corporation. Joint stock realms thus solve the primary historical problem of monarchical government, the vagaries of the biological process. In other words, they assure that the overall direction of the realm will always be both strong and responsible. at least responsible in a financial sense. A joint stock realm simply cannot have anything comparable to a weak monarch of the classical era. Realms will certainly recruit their executives from the same talent pool large companies now draw from. This sentence here is actually very ironic. How many Fortune 500 CEOs today are regularly bullied and led by coalitions of their nominal subordinates, as, for just one example, the French monarchy so often was? 0 is probably too easy an answer, but at least an approximation. It's ironic that now you would look at that and you'd say, well, there's definitely ones who have been bullied by it now. However, if you go watch the last Anamnesis video, you'll learn that those people doing the bullying aren't the ones driving the bus. The subordinates who think that they're leveraging their companies into doing XYZ, they're not actually their own sovereign actors. They're being funded and backed and weaponized and used and manipulated into doing that by other CEOs and the like who are even more powerful. So it's not as simple as to say, oh, well, these CEOs are getting bullied by their subordinates. The CEOs are being attacked by an army represented by more powerful people. So the problem with them is that those CEOs don't have enough power. It isn't that they are just being. This isn't necessarily a disapproval of what he's saying. Okay.
That would be fun to talk with him about if you manage to not find a way to alienate him.
Piss him off before
between
then.
now and the time that we have a chance of talking with that guy. That'd be fun to talk about.
That is a question that's always been on my list. When we talk to him, that's one thing I would want to know from him.
That I want to talk about cops in the military because he seems to have a lot of respect for the military. Just based on a couple quotes I'd have to dig up. There's a few of them, but that's one of them too.
Okay. Note, however, that we are not considering anything like the watered-down constitutional, i.e., again, ceremonial, monarchies of the democratic period. If the joint stock realm is like a monarchy, it is like a true, absolute, or, most pejoratively, divine right monarchy. With all due respect, dear reader, the probability that you have a sound understanding of the case for divine right monarchy is approximately the probability that a large white goat will fall out of my ass. This means that you need to read the great English exponent of absolute government, Sir Robert Filmer, and his masterpiece, Patriarcha. Filmer was the baddest ass reactionary who ever lived. Frankly, he makes Carlyle look like a liberal. Just the title of Patriarcha is cooler than Jesus Christ himself, and the contents don't even begin to disappoint. We launch almost immediately into hardcore Anglican theology. If Filmer isn't Winter Beach reading, I don't know who is. I mean, seriously, how do you justify divine right monarchy to an atheist? Is it anything like selling refrigerators to Eskimos? Since I am both an atheist and a believer in divine right monarchy, I'd better be able to square this circle. One of the major doctrinal thrusts of European Christianity in all ages and phases of its career, and certainly even in the thinly disguised crypto-Christian Unitarianism that has become the religion of the world's ruling class, e.g., if ever you meet a moderate Muslim, he is really a Unitarian, is the quest to justify the political structure of the world. So one of the major doctrinal thrusts of European Christianity is the quest to justify the political structure of the world. What makes a king a king? Why should the king be the king? Why can't I be the king? Or at least my cousin, Ricky? Do we even need a king? And so on. People have strong emotional feelings about these questions to this day. At least they have a strong emotional feeling about the last one. Do we even need a king? Not answering them is certainly not acceptable. But Filmer, the divine right and the divine right monarchist in general, comes as close as possible to not answering. Moreover, his reasoning is impeccable for the orthodox, and now he's quoting Filmer. If it please God, for the correction of the prince or punishment of the people, to suffer princes to be removed and others to be placed in their rooms, either by the factions of the nobility or the rebellion of the people, in all such cases, the judgment of God, who hath power to give and to take away kingdoms, is most just. Yet the ministry of men who execute God's judgments without commission is sinful and damnable. God doth but use and turn men's unrighteous acts to the performance of his righteous decrees. End quote. Note that this is basically a 17th century way of saying shit happens. God being omnipotent, etc., if Dickweed over there is king, it is obviously because God wanted Dickweed to be king. And who are you to disagree with God? But an atheist such as myself has a simpler way of getting to the same result. Really, what Filmer is saying is, if you want stable government, accept the status quo as the verdict of history. There is no reason at all to inquire as to why the Bourbons are the kings of France. The rule is arbitrary. Nonetheless, it is to the benefit of all that this arbitrary rule exists, because obedience to the rightful king is a scaling point of nonviolent agreement. Now, again, I think we talked about a scaling point before, but it's also called a focal point. It's part of game theory, and it's a solution that people tend to choose by default in the absence of communication. So it's you want to try to come up with a thing that even if people aren't able to talk to each other about something, they will naturally act in a specific way. They will naturally cooperate in a specific way because they're incentivized to do so, even if they haven't gone out of their way to cooperate to do that thing. It's called a scaling point. So what he's saying is that if the arbitrary rule is accept the status quo, and everybody just naturally accepts the status quo, then you don't have to have a perfect agreement between everyone except to just accept the status quo. So that was the strength of divine right monarchy. It was he's the king because he's the king. And because God controls all things, whatever happens is in God's control. So if he's the king, then God must want him to be the king. And when God doesn't want him to be the king anymore, then he'll do something to make him not be the king, whether it's the nobility uprising and overthrowing him, like with Julius Caesar, or whether it's the people rising up and overthrowing him, which, as we know, isn't necessarily possible. That might be the English Revolution or the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution. In any of those cases, if that happens, it's because God commanded it so. And this actually touches on the conversation about free will that we were having, because I believe this is actually God's prescription for us in the Bible. It is accept authority because it exists. If hierarchy is natural, and if somebody is in a position of authority, it's because they deserve to be in a position of authority. Now, they may abuse their authority, in which case there's consequences for abusing your authority. But respect authority by default. Acknowledge the hierarchy and exist within it and respect it by default. And you see this all throughout the Bible, most specifically in Romans 13, where Paul says, basically explicitly says to respect the local ruling authorities because God has put them where they are. So I believe that this is actually God's position. I think Filmer is identifying God's actual position, which is every hierarchy is descendant from me. Hierarchies are natural. If someone is in a position of authority over you, they deserve your respect because they're in a position of authority over you. And if they misbehave, if they misuse their authority, there's a process for holding them accountable for misusing their authority. But the problem isn't their authority. The problem is the way that they're using it. And this is what it means to be right-wing. This is the basis of right-wing the right-wing perspective. Left-wing is egalitarian. Right-wing is hierarchy and authority are completely natural. They will always exist. They must exist because the consequences of them not existing is chaos. This is what order is. Order is when hierarchy and authority is respected because it exists, and it's accepted that the fact that it exists means that it's sanctioned by God, and you must respect it. It's a scaling point, as he mentioned. So, okay, there is no reason at all to inquire as to why the Bourbons are the kings of France. The rule is arbitrary. Nonetheless, it is to the benefit of all that this arbitrary rule exists, because obedience to the rightful king is a scaling point of nonviolent agreement. And better yet, there is no way for a political force to steer the outcome of succession, at least nothing comparable to the role of the educational authorities in a democracy. In other words, to put it in Patchwork terms, the relationship between realm and patch is no more and no less than a property right. A patch is a sovereign property, that is, one whose proprietor has no defender but itself. Nonetheless, in moral terms, we may ask, why does this realm hold that patch? And the answer, as it always is within any system of strong property rights, will not be because it deserves to, but because it does. Note that whatever the theology, Filmer's model of government captures the property right approach perfectly. Also, one must admire Filmer's wicked gall in starting out by describing the right of rebellion as a Catholic heresy, Catholicism being admitted, at least by all fair historians, to be the creed of your average divine right monarchist, as Protestantism is of vile democracy. So Filmer's move here is wildly misleading, but pure fun, not unlike comparing liberals to Mussolini. Nothing to do with anything, but it sure gets a rise out of him and moves skews like no one's business. The invention of this spurious right was perhaps the first tiny crack in the philosophical girders of the classical European monarchies. Filmer deftly points out that this is an engineering error, the ancient political solecism of imperium in imperio, which means imperium and imperio is deep state. So it's a state within a state. So the invention of the spurious right of rebellion was perhaps the first tiny crack in the philosophical girders of the classical European monarchies. Once it became accepted that people have a right to rebel, like we hold these truths self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that the men are allowed to overthrow a government when it isn't working in their behalf. He's saying that this is an engineering. Filmer points out that this is an engineering error, the ancient political solecism of a state within a state, which is now, in a typical democratic propaganda maneuver, lauded as that bogus political panacea, separation of powers. What he's saying, this is what Anamnesis' most recent video is about. What he's saying is that when you grant rebellion as a right, what you've just done is you've created a state within a state. You've now informalized power by introducing this idea. And so he's going to quote here. I don't know what he's quoting from. I think he's quoting from Filmer. He says, okay, yeah. So Filmer is mentioning Bellarmine, who was an Italian Jesuit and cardinal of the Catholic Church and canonized as a saint and named doctor of the church. He's one of the most important figures in the Counter-Reformation. So Filmer references him. He says, thirdly, Bellarmine concludes that if there be a lawful cause, the multitude may change the kingdom. Here I would fain know who shall judge of this lawful cause. If the multitude, for I see nobody else can, then this is a pestilent and dangerous conclusion. And what he's saying here is that Bellarmine is saying that if the masses have a good reason, then they can change the structure of government. And he's saying, well, who's the one who judges whether it's a good reason or not? Now you're appealing to some other authority, and I don't know who that authority is. I don't know who's entitled to judge that. But if it's the multitude becoming the judge in their own case, then he's saying that's not a good idea. This is a bad thing. So back to Moldbug. He says, Filmer, writing for an educated audience, does not bother to remind them of the basic premise of Roman law. Nemo iudex in causa sua, meaning no man can be a judge in his own case, and no multitude either. Pestilent indeed. These political three-card Monty tricks, in which sovereign authority is in some way divided, limited, obviously no sovereign can limit itself, or otherwise weakened, in all cases for the purported purpose of securing in all cases for the purported purpose of securing liberty, have no more place in a patchwork realm than they do at, say, Apple. Let me say this one more time. So no sovereign can limit itself. That's an oxymoron. A sovereign is the thing that isn't limited. It's the thing that does the limiting. It says, so he says, these political three-card Monty tricks in which sovereign authority is in some way divided, limited, or otherwise weakened, in all cases for the reason of securing liberty, they have no place in a patchwork realm any more than they would at, say, Apple. You don't divide the structure of authority within Apple to make Apple better. They are spurious artifacts of the interregnum, the democratic interregnum. Their effect on both a realm and its residents is purely counterproductive. Begone with them. In reality, no sovereign can be subject to law. This is a political perpetual motion machine. Law is not law unless it is judged and enforced. And by whom? For example, if you think a Supreme Court with judicial review can make government subject to law, you are obviously unfamiliar with the sordid history of American constitutional jurisprudence. All your design has achieved is to make your Supreme Court sovereign. Indeed, if the court had only one justice, a proper title for that justice would be king. Sorry, kid, you haven't violated the conservation of anything. Indeed, as Filmer points out, the unity of chief executive, chief lawmaker, and chief justice is simple, natural, and elegant, to quote Filmer. There can be no laws without a supreme power to command or make them. In all aristocracies, the nobles are above the laws, and in all democracies, the people. By the like reason, in a monarchy, the king must of necessity be above the laws. There can be no sovereign majesty in him that is under them. That which giveth the very being to a king is the power to give laws. Without this power, he's but an equivocal king. It skills not which way kings come by their power, whether by election, donation, succession, or by any other means. For it is still the manner of the government by supreme power that makes them properly kings, and not the means of obtaining their crowns. Neither doth the diversity of laws nor contrary customs, whereby each kingdom differs from another, make the forms of commonweal different, unless the power of making laws be in several subjects. For the confirmation of this point, Aristotle saith that a perfect kingdom is that wherein the king rules all things according to his own will, for he that is called a king according to the law makes no kind of kingdom at all. This, it seems, also the Romans well understood to be most necessary in a monarchy. For though they were a people most greedy of liberty, yet the Senate did free Augustus from all necessities of law, that he might be free of his own authority and of absolute power over himself and over the laws, to do what he pleased and leave undone what he listed. And this decree was made while Augustus was yet absent. Accordingly, we find that Ulpian, the great lawyer, delivers it for a rule of the civil law, princeps legibus solutus est. The prince is not bound by the laws. Besides, all laws are of themselves dumb, and some or other must be trusted with the application of them to particulars. In other words, laws can't enforce themselves. Someone has to figure out how to enforce them, and they tend to be, they're not very specific. Ultimately, you have to try to narrow them down and figure out how to apply them to a specific situation. It's not just obvious. Besides, all laws are of themselves dumb, and some or other must be trusted with the application of them to particulars, by examining all circumstances to pronounce when they are broken or by whom. This work of right application of laws is not a thing easy or obvious for ordinary capacities, but requires profound abilities of nature for the beating out of the truth. Witness the diversity and sometimes the contrariety of opinions of the learned judges in some difficult points. Since this is the common condition of laws, it is also most reasonable that the lawmaker should be trusted with the application or interpretation of the laws. And for this cause, anciently, the kings of this land have sitten personally in courts of judicature, and are still representatively present in all courts. The judges are but substituted, and called the king's justices, and their power ceaseth when the king is in place. End quote. So much, in other words, for Montesquieu. Also, note how the democratic doctrine, now assumed by all, simply twists Ulpian's axiom into its polar opposite. Hey, hippie, who knows more about law, you or Ulpian? Ulpian, being a Roman jurist who was born in Tyre, he is considered one of the great legal authorities of his time, and was one of the 5 jurists upon whom decisions were to be based, according to the law of citations of Valentinian III. So this was around, for he was born in the year 170 and died in 223 to 228. He says, I'm reminded of Einstein's gem, found on so many a Prius. One cannot simultaneously prevent and prepare for war. Or, as the Romans put it, si vis pacem para bellum, which is, if you want peace, prepare for war. And we wonder how the world got so screwed. Stick to physics, Al. A patchwork realm, or any modern corporate sovereign, is no more bound by the laws it imposes on its residents than Linden Lab is bound by the terms of use policy it enforces in Second Life. I don't have any idea what these things are. Linden Lab is a company creating virtual experiences. Second Life is presumably, like a virtual world that they use, I guess. So a patchwork realm or any modern corporate sovereign is no more bound by the laws it imposes on its residents than Linden Lab is bound by the terms of use policy it enforces in Second Life. In fact, it is probably less so bound because a terms of use policy creates at least the vague suggestion of liability, whereas suing a sovereign is yet another one of these political solecisms. You can't sue a sovereign because the sovereign would be the one judging his own case. The sovereign doesn't answer to a higher authority. So if you're suing him, you're appealing to a higher authority and saying, hey, render judgment on my behalf. And there is no higher authority. So it's a solecism. It just doesn't work. This is not at all to say that a patchwork realm does not enforce the rule of law, except, of course, under conditions of martial law that involve a general security threat. A state of siege is an option anywhere, anytime, for any reason. To enforce a law is not to be bound by a law. These are two completely different things. I don't feel I can repeat this too often. To enforce a law is not to be bound by a law. Patchwork realms can be expected to enforce a fair and consistent code of laws, not for moral or theological reasons, not because they're compelled to do so by a superior sovereign or some other force, real or imaginary, but for the same economic reasons that compel them to provide excellent customer service in general. Real estate on which the rule of law prevails is much, much more valuable than real estate on which it doesn't, and the value of a realm is the value of its real estate. For an example, look at the real estate price trends in California or New York and Florida. I'm sure that real estate is appreciating in Florida and depreciating in California and New York, at least relative to Florida. And especially going forward, because based God Ron DeSantis is actually governing, and he's creating the appearance, at least, of or attempting to create the appearance of a competent, stable government that actually cares about rule of law. So Florida is going to be inundated with people who want to move there to get a little bit of stability and competence in their government, and it's going to just drive the cost of their real estate way up.
Your friend Vin Armani has said that even after DeSantis suspends all the remaining COVID restrictions, that masks will still be seen in Florida. This fact is the signal. The Overton window has been moved, and it can never go back. It will move further on to the next virus panic, which we will surely see next year.
Right.
I just wanted to share that with you, since it was your friend who tweeted that out. It'll be fun to see. I'm really curious about this about that little hypothesis there, because I'm just some guy who moved from Florida to North Carolina thinking that it was going to be totally the fucking opposite, and have just watched, just my jaw just falls to the floor anytime I see what's going on in Florida versus here in North Carolina. But yeah, I'd love to see what happens with all that, what the next year is going to look like regards specifically to Florida. So
then
we'll have we'll have just like a little marker, that we can just kind of see. This is how it was, May 3rd, the day that Bill Gates got divorced, and just see how it looks May 3rd, 2022. 2022, by the way, that was a year that started floating around real quick in 2020. Did you notice that? Like when people, when are things gonna?
Yeah.
It was always 2022. People were always pointing to 2022, and I was curious as to, what that has to do with anything. That number has to mean fucking something to the lizard people. You know what I mean?
Well, it's a 6 year. 2 + 2 + 2.
Great.
If you want to go the numerology angle,
don't we always?
Vin is he tends to be a kind of a perpetual cynic regarding a lot of this stuff, and from his perspective, he's got a pretty good reason for it. But one thing that I've noticed that he does is number one, he has a very strong vested interest in ensuring that his predictions are seen as coming true, because he has his Vinstradamus brand, and he's been a little willing to. He's kind of stretched the definition of true with some of his predictions recently a little much, but he makes the same mistake in evaluating someone like, say, Ron DeSantis as most other libertarians, where he says that Ron DeSantis is not 100% perfect, flawless, ideal in every possible way, doing everything exactly right. Therefore, he's worthless and there's no value in him whatsoever, and he's going to fail and he's going to be consumed and he's going to bend the knee and all that. And this is the consistent libertarian error. Like, I'm not looking for someone who's going to be perfect, because I don't respect this state in that way. Like, I think for you to look at someone and be like, oh, well, he's not absolutely perfect, you are more invested in the quality of the state than I am. I'm not expecting absolutely perfect. I'm expecting better. I'm expecting something that we can build upon. I'm expecting something that isn't an absolute complete abortion, because that should be your expectation, that it's going to be an absolute complete abortion. And if he's better than that, then you should praise him for being better than that. You should like, if you want people to keep doing things that are good, then you reward them when they do something that's a little bit good. Because if you reward them when they do something that's a little bit good, then maybe they'll do something that's a little bit more good, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. There's no like, there's no, we don't have to have utopia tomorrow, and anything less than that is an utter failure and should be thrown in the garbage heap. I don't have that expectation. I want to see someone who's doing something better than the people around them, and I want to reward him for doing the thing that's better than the people around him, so hopefully he'll do something that's even better. And if he keeps doing something that's better, eventually other people are going to be like, well, I want to do something that's better too, because, I look how popular he is. Look how many accolades and stuff he's getting. I want to be like him. So I'm going to do things that are a little bit better. And then, hey, good job. Good job for doing something a little bit better. This instinct to like it's the letting the perfect be the enemy of the good syndrome. And it plagues libertarians. It plagues conservatives to a large degree as well. But it also plagues, this is a leftist instinct to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. When you have good, it's good. It's not bad because it's not perfect. It's good because it's good. So act like it's good. Don't act like it's bad because it's not perfect. If you take the good and you act like it's good, you'll get more good. And as you keep getting more good, you're getting closer and closer to perfect. But it doesn't have to be perfect now. You should be willing to accept something that's good now and then continue to build upon that. So anyways, I know that's why I'm a big fan of Ron DeSantis.
We've got our eyes out. Yeah, we've got our eyes out here, and maybe if things turn out to continue to move in that direction, it might be the site of the Kingfield patch. Who knows?
There's a possibility for that. Maybe Texas, maybe Florida, maybe somewhere different altogether. We'll see. Okay, back to Moldbug. So he's talking about how real estate on which the rule of law prevails is much, much more valuable than real estate on which it doesn't, and the value of a realm is the value of its real estate. I suspect that in a well-run realm, this is almost literally the case, because I suspect that a well-run realm makes its take via the world's fairest, least intrusive tax, property tax. In fact, while I don't know that this has ever been tried, it is easy to design a perfectly fair and perfectly non-intrusive property tax regime. Require real estate owners to assess their own property, offering it for sale at the assessed price, and set the tax at a percentage of that price. No muss, no fuss, no IRS. Since no one can live or work without real estate, it should be straightforward to tune this self-assessed property tax to extract the laffer maximum. The laffer curve being a thing from supply-side economist and Bob Murphy mentor Arthur Laffer, which illustrates a theoretical relationship between rates of taxation and the resulting levels of the government's tax revenue. The Laffer curve assumes that no tax revenue is raised at the extreme tax rates of 0 and 100. So if you have zero tax rate, obviously you're not going to make any revenue. But if you have a 100% tax rate, then you're still going to make no revenue because nobody's going to work if they're being taxed 100%. So it theorizes, or it assumes, that there is a tax rate between 0% and 100% that maximizes government tax revenue. The shape of the curve is a function of taxable income elasticity, i.e. taxable income changes in response to the changes in the rate of taxation. So as you raise the rate of taxation, people will change their behavior, and so your revenue is going to either come, if you raise it too much, people might change their behavior so much that you actually decrease your revenue generated. And if you lower your tax rate, people may actually be encouraged to do more, and you may raise your actual revenue generated. So the Laffer curve is that concept. And basically he's saying that in a realm where the self-assessed property tax is the primary way of generating revenue, where people just declare what they feel like their property is worth and they pay a percentage of that, it would be very easy for that to be the optimal laffer maximum, where you've got just the exact right tax revenue where people are happy to pay it, but also it's the most revenue you can get. To live on a patchwork patch, you have to sign a bilateral contract with the realm. You promise to be a good boy and behave yourself. The realm promises to treat you fairly. There is an inherent asymmetry in this agreement because you have no enforcement mechanism against the realm, just as you have no enforcement mechanism against the United States. However, a realm's compliance with its customer service agreements is sure to be a matter of rather intense attention among residents and prospective residents, and thus among shareholders as well. For example, I suspect that every customer service agreement will include the right to remove oneself and one's assets from the realm at any time, no questions asked, to any other realm that will accept the immigrant. Possibly with an exception for those involved in the criminal justice process, but this may not even be needed. Who wants a criminal? Not another realm, surely. Suppose a realm unilaterally abrogates this right of immigration. It has just converted its residents into what are, in a sense, slaves. It is no longer Disneyland, it is a plantation. If it's any good with cinder blocks, barbed wires, and minefields, there is no escape. What do you say if you're stuck on this farm? You say, yes, massa. A slave you are, and a slave you will be forever. This is terrible, of course. But again, the mechanism we rely on to prevent it is no implausible deus ex machina, no Indian rope trick from the age of Voltaire, but the sound engineering principle of the profit motive. A realm that pulls this kind of crap cannot be trusted by anyone ever again. It is not even safe to visit. Tourism disappears. The potential real estate bid from immigrants disappears. And while your residents are indeed stuck, they are also remarkably sullen and display no great interest in slaving for you. Which is a more valuable patch of real estate today, South Korea or North Korea? Yet before the war, the North was more industrialized and the South was more rural. Such are the profits of converting an entire country into a giant gulag. One of the most common errors in understanding the pre-modern era is the confusion of monarchy with tyranny. Nothing like Stalinism, for example, is recorded in the history of the European aristocratic era. Why? Because Stalin had to murder to stay in power. Anyone, certainly any of the old Bolsheviks, could have taken his place. The killing machine took on a life of its own. The tyrant, the mafia boss, stands at the apex of a pyramid of power, each block in which is a person who hopes to someday kill the boss and take his job. In a tyranny, murder and madness become part of the fabric of the state. In a monarchy, however, the succession is clear, and if by some accident of law and fate there are multiple candidates, they are at least each other's relatives. This rules out neither murder nor madness, but they are the exception and not the rule. Obviously, a joint stock realm faces completely different problems in maintaining internal security. Internal security can be defined as the protection of the shareholder's property against all internal threats, including both residents and employees, up to and certainly including the chief executive. If the shareholders cannot dismiss the CEO of the realm by voting according to proper corporate procedures, a total security failure has occurred. The standard patchwork remedy for this problem is the cryptographic chain of command. Ultimately, power over the realm truly rests with the shareholders, because they use a secret sharing or similar cryptographic algorithm to maintain control over its root keys. Secret sharing, also called secret splitting, refers to methods for distributing a secret among a group of participants, each of whom is allocated a share of the secret. The secret can be reconstructed only when a sufficient number of possibly different types of shares are combined together. Individual shares are of no use on their own. So the power of the realm ultimately truly rests with the shareholders because they use a secret sharing or similar cryptographic algorithm to maintain control over its root keys. Authority is then delegated to the board, if any, the CEO and other officers, and thence down to the military or other security forces. At the leaves of the tree are computerized weapons, which will not fire without cryptographic authorization. Thus, any fragment of the security force which remains loyal to the shareholders can use its operational weapons to defeat any coalition of disloyal, and hence disarmed, employees and or residents. Ouch! Taste the pain, traitors! Needless to say, the dependence of this design on 21st century technology is ample explanation of why history has not bequeathed to us anything like the joint stock realm. It was simply not implementable, any more than our ancestors could build a suspension bridge out of limestone blocks. One thing I'll say is that this is where his thing gets the most into sci-fi, and the whole cryptographic weapons thing, I don't know how plausible that would be. But at this point, we're not talking about, well, would this be right or wrong? We're talking about, is this engineerable? Is it like this is just technology that you need to engineer? And each time that you bring up an objection, oh, well, it wouldn't work because of XYZ, well, you've just created a new problem that we have to engineer a solution for. That's why this whole thing just comes down to engineering once you're thinking about it the right way.
Well, I've got to head out to teach the ways of the dance. I'll spare you the slow shirt removal since we have this. Since we just have this little natural break.
Deal.
But I want to thank all of the fans for their careful attention, and I know Matthew's really going to bring this home here at the end and has a small diatribe he's going to go on that sort of ties all the ideas together, in keeping with our own sort of philosophy. And you guys are really going to enjoy it. We can always discuss it in the supporting listeners group with those of you who are members. And don't forget to go to Paloma Verde, CBD.com.
Got it.
Use promo code KING and rub your delicious thighs with that non-THC salve stick.
Bingo. See you, buddy. All right. There we go. Now it's just me. So we've only got maybe 6 or 8 more paragraphs, it looks like. So we're almost done. Where are we? Okay, so with this basic background in filmerist government, and with the as yet unjustified assumption that a patch is safe against external aggression, let's start to look at what a 21st century corporate sovereign might actually want to do. For simplicity and for my own personal amusement, let's call the realm Friscorp and say its patch is the present-day city of San Francisco, population about 750,000. And then there's a note here. It says, as noted in Moldbug and Carlisle, at the time of writing, Mencius was a resident of said city. And he quotes from that other one. San Francisco is not well governed by any reasonable standard, but I live there and I can tell you it's a pretty nice place to live. So just verifying that he lives there. Okay. Obviously, Friscorp would like to turn SF into the coolest, most hoppin', and definitely most expensive city on the planet. Call it a combination of Paris, Monaco, and Babylon. Destroying ugly post-war buildings, for example, and reconstructing them in appropriate historical styles will definitely be high on Friscorp's agenda. The first and touchiest problem, though, is just deciding who gets to live in San Francisco. Friscorp's answer is simple. Anyone who isn't dangerous to others and can afford to live in San Francisco. It's probably also nice if they speak English, but considering the exigencies of the second constraint, they almost certainly will. Friscorp may also import menial laborers, as Dubai does today, but they are not to be confused with the actual residents. Here we face a slight predicament. There are quite a few people presently in San Francisco who do not meet the second constraint, are pretty iffy on the first as well, and have no labor skills to speak of. The first and second constraints, again, being anyone who isn't dangerous to others and anyone who can afford to live in San Francisco. So there are quite a few people presently in San Francisco who cannot afford to live there, and they're pretty iffy on the aren't dangerous to others part as well. And they have no labor skills to speak of. What do we do with them? Sell their slums out from under them, obviously. Demo everything, spray for roaches, rodents, and pit bulls. Smooth the rubble out with a bulldozer or two, and possibly a little aerial bombing. Erect new residential districts suitable for Russian oligarchs. Next question. But where do they go? Since their customer service contract gives them the right of exit, these people, call them Bezonians, where he links to an article called June Library from National Review. Oh, it's a quote from Shakespeare. Great men oft die by vile Bezonians. A Roman sorter and bandito slave, murdered sweet Tully, Brutus bastard hand, stabbed Julius Caesar, savage islanders, Pompey the Great, and Suffolk dies by pirates. And so Bezonian was a beggar, a worthless person. From Italian, bisonoso, a pauper. Okay, so, but where do they go? Since their customer service contract gives them the right of exit, these people, call them Bezonians, can of course immigrate to any other realm in the patchwork. This presumes, however, that said realm is willing to accept them. And why would it be? If our design does not provide for the existence of a large number of human beings whose existence anywhere is not only unprofitable, but in fact a straight up loss to that realm, it is simply inconsistent with reality. The design faces an existential challenge. In Chapter 2, we'll present the shocking but ineluctable solution and figure out the second half of our security problem, the relationships between realms. And that is the end of Patchwork, Chapter 1. So now, real quick here, I will check out some of your comments. You guys have been talking while we've been going here. We've been going for almost 2 hours. So let's see. We're at an hour 54. So I'll take 5 minutes to just kind of read through what you guys said here, and then I got to peace out and get some stuff done as well. And we'll read Chapter 2 on Thursday, I imagine. I think that shouldn't be a problem. And that should be fun. Chapter 2 really gets into some interesting stuff. So Popular Liberty says you can't create an LTP government or a low time preference government with high time preference strategies and tactics. One thing that Popular Liberty has done is he's differentiated between the left and right using time preference. So low time preference people tend to be right wing, and libertarian are the most low time preference people ostensibly, at least in the values that they express. Maybe not necessarily how they actually act. But so someone who's low time preference is someone who is willing to push out satisfaction of desire. They're willing to wait. They're patient. They're building for the future. They have a longer time horizon. That's a low time preference person. A high time preference person is someone who needs it now. They want it now. They must have it now. They're more focused on consumption, and they aren't building or planning for the future. Leftists are high time preference, and this is why our governments, existing the way they are right now, are acting as high time preference governments. They're borrowing like bandits from the future, and just to try to spend now and to do stuff now. They've gotten trapped in a high time preference loop. So he was responding to the idea of using leftist tactics to try to bring about a right-wing result. And you can't use high time preference tactics to bring about a low time preference result. But he correctly points out not all the left's tactics are high time preference, though. Miguel, what's up, Miguel? He says, for every Gorbachev, there is a Yeltsin. For every Yeltsin, there's a Putin. Mao to Deng, Lenin to Stalin. I need some of the CBD as I'm grading finals papers. It's good stuff. Okay. Neo-reactionary. Popular Liberty says we're pro-reactionary. We don't sit around and wait for the left to come storm the castle. Miguel says they already have. Now the system declines, and it's about having the right people restoring order. Vincent says DeSantis has won him over. Bradley says, question for you when you have time. Do you think it will be enough to control the source of income or money, or will it be more important to control the source of food, water, land, etc. in the future? That's actually a very good question. Will it be more important to control the source of income, or will it be more important to control the source of food, water, and land? I don't know if those are necessarily going to be, if they're separable. I don't know if you can take those apart from each other. I think controlling the income may depend upon the resources there. But this gets into, we're kind of getting into completely uncharted territory where, we're dealing with like digital worlds, overlapping much more with the physical world. We're going to get into VR and AR, and impacting the way we interact with each other. And there's people making fake meat and fake food that way, and that's going to kind of change as more and more people move away from eating red meat, and as the regime begins to specifically disincentivize people from eating red meat, which I'm sure they're going to, then it's just going to change the structure of supply chains, and it's hard to predict. I don't know. A lot of these problems are pretty difficult to solve because we've got to. If you're trying to create a low time preference solution, you're trying to really build for the future, then you have to have a lot of insight because things are changing so rapidly, and they're changing into things that we've never seen before. We're dealing with exponential technology growth that's completely fundamentally changed the way that we work with each other, the way we relate to one another. So it's kind of like I have no idea where we're going to be a year from now, much less 5 or 10 or 20 or 50 years from now. So that's part of the reason why we wanted to start this podcast and wanted to start the show and create this community is to get people who are thinking about this sort of thing. Because it's just going to come down to the minds that are available. That the more brain power we have focused on this problem, the better solutions we'll come up with. And this type of conversation really is only going to be had by the people who are best able to engineer a solution like that, because people who wouldn't really be capable of engineering a solution like that most likely wouldn't even be interested in a conversation like this, and they wouldn't even be thinking of that. You have to be kind of to sound as condescending as possible, you have to really be a pretty high IQ person to be into a subject like this, which means that then you have to be good at pattern matching, which is then going to be good at predicting cause and effect and that type of thing. So yeah, that's really why we're trying to create this group. That was something we talked about in our branding meeting on Sunday, that we want to have, we want to create a community of people. We don't really care about the size of the community. We care more about the quality of the community. And the people who are in this community are people who are focused and people who are, who buy into the vision and who have skin in the game and want to be invested personally in starting to solve these kinds of problems, or at least being able to fund or support and assist the people who can solve those problems. I don't see myself as really someone who solves the problems. I'm more the person who synthesizes the conversations of the people who are actually solving it and then gets it in front of other people. I don't generate my own ideas as well as I synthesize and put together and communicate other people's ideas. So that's kind of where I see my role in this, is just creating the community, kind of pulling everyone together and being kind of like the networker that kind of coordinates the party, brings the party together. And I'm like, all right, everyone, have at it, start talking, and you guys solve the solutions. And if I understand any of this or I have any thoughts, then I'll contribute them as well. So that's a question that honestly I don't really have an answer to off the top of my head right now. Apart from, I think that controlling the money of the realm would depend very significantly on the food and the water and the land in the realm as well. And this type of thing, to be clear, this sort of patchwork idea is very much an academic pursuit. This isn't actually like, this is the way that it's going to look. It's just kind of a hypothetical, this is how it could look. But we're so far from being able to accomplish anything like this. This is kind of like the goal. This is, I mean, if you're paying attention, this is just Ancapistan. This is what Ancapistan would look like. These are all private property realms that are like, if I have, say I start off, I have my wife and my son, say we have 5 more kids, and we make a bunch of money and we go out and we buy a plot of land and we buy 10,000 acres in the Midwest, and we build a little commune. We have a whole bunch of people that come and they all live on that land with us, and they all work the land, and we're doing like what Kanye is doing in Wyoming. You've got like I was going to say plantation, but not necessarily a plantation, but kind of like a plantation where you have a bunch of people that are all there working together, living together. They're all a group and network together. And you have a single patriarch at the top, the person who's the ultimate property owner and the decision maker and the one who organizes and arranges everything. Go a couple generations down and you've amassed more people, maybe 2 or 3 generations from now, assuming everything stayed stable. Like my great grandson, perhaps, would be the patriarch who owns that realm. And now it's gotten to the point where there's 30,000 people who are all part of this large community. And each of me and each of my descendants have all bought more and more land. So now we own, the equivalent of like an entire county, say. And there's 50,000 people who live in that county. The land is all owned by the one guy at the top. And he's the king. He's the sovereign monarch. That would be an Ancapistan type of a solution. That's essentially what he's describing here. He's just coming at it from a different angle, and he's imagining a world where all this land is owned by shareholders who are all invested in, it's all owned by a corporation with shareholders who are vested into it, and then the shareholders have their process for determining the board and the CEO and all that. So he's just describing an anarchist region. And so this is why, like, I want to get this kind of thing in front of people to everyone kind of just thinks about they're like, oh, ANCAPs and Ancapistan and, just be, no government, everything's private, whatever. That's what it is. That's what monarchy is, just private government. It's private law. And it's a form of private law and private government. So this is a hypothetical. This is one way that it could look or one way that it could function, but it would take a lot of engineering to get it to this point. And for something like this to work, you would have to have not just that individual realm, but the realms around it would all have to at least buy into their idea. This doesn't work with just a single patch in one area. There has to be sovereign units around it. They wouldn't necessarily have to be patchworks as well, but they would have to at least respect the sovereignty of the patchwork. And you're still going to have all kinds of attack surface for corruption, for people getting bought off, and invasion, and whatever else. You're going to have to deal with all the same problems. But again, they're all engineering problems. And so hopefully when you've built the system, you've baked in as much security and protection as possible to prevent all those various sorts of potential for attack. But anyways, Popular Liberty is catching up. He's got a lot of got some comments in here. I'm gonna have to go through and read those later because I've got to get finished up here. Let me see what Vincent said. Building up the intellectual capital is extremely important. Trump's heart was maybe in the right place, but he's a lion, not a fox. He did not really understand what he was all about. Yeah, absolutely. That's I don't know if you're deliberately referencing it, but that's I think was it Pareto who talked about the two different types of political form. No, it was Mosca, Gaetano Mosca talked about the two different types of there's political formulas, and there's broadly two different types of ruling elite psychologies. There's the lions and then the foxes. And the lions basically rule by force, and they respect tradition and everything. And then the foxes rule by wits, and they tend to be more progressive. And right now we have a regime that's populated almost entirely by foxes. And that's really where the American regime has gotten itself to. Again, Vincent says, what was the intellectual capital he had at his disposal? Stephen Bannon. Aside from that, it was all normie cons who constantly undermined the line. Yeah, it was. You have to get the intellectual capital in one place, but then you have to be careful that intellectual capital doesn't present a threat. It has to seem completely inoffensive to the regime. It can't look like, hey, we're putting together a hive mind of people who are going to destroy the regime. It's like, no, we're not a threat to the regime. We want you to be better. We want to make you better at what you do. Here's all these areas where you could improve, and we could achieve all of these goals even better. You have to be able to speak their language and not come across as a threat at all. Because as soon as you come off as a threat, you're going to get crushed. You're going to get, as Anamnesis said in his video, you're going to get human rights loopholed if you come off as a threat to the regime at all. Unless you have the power to overwhelm the regime. And nobody's going to have the power to overwhelm this regime. Not anytime soon. Anyways, okay, so thanks again, folks, for joining us. This has been another episode of King Pilled. It's been a live reading. We're going to do, there's 4 chapters in Patchwork. We're going to do those presumably over the next 3 episodes. And then we're also going to do some live readings getting into Gray Mirror, which is Moldbug's newest blog that he's currently adding to. It's all stuff that he's been writing over the last year or so, and it's Unqualified Reservations is very good. Gray Mirror is almost on another level. It's just, he's more mature, he's more thought through, and he kind of he covers a lot of the same subject material, but he takes a different angle at it, and I like it a lot. So we'll get into that at some point in the future. Go again, support our sponsor, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. That's PalomaVerdecBD.com. Use promo code KING to get 25% off any order over $75. And check out their new website. It looks really, really nice. Carlos and Dennis have done a great job. We really appreciate them supporting us. And you can follow me on Twitter at RealKingPilled. You can don't follow Steven. He doesn't want you to follow him at Messina Inc. And we will be back again on Thursday to do another live reading of Moldbug. Let us know what you thought of this. Leave us a comment. Like the show, share it, and subscribe to our channel. And once we get this out on iTunes, then you can also go leave us a 5-star rating and review and let other people know what you think of it. With that said,